I shelled out $300,000 for my daughter's fairy tale wedding in Paris. And honestly, I did it with a smile on my face. I booked the chateau. I paid for the vintage wines, and I even bought first-class tickets for her and her fiancé, Jean-Luc. I was sitting at my desk, enjoying a glass of cheap scotch to celebrate making that final wire transfer, when my computer chimed. It was an email from my daughter, Vanessa. The subject line read, "Important wedding update." I clicked it, expecting a thank you note or maybe a photo of the floral arrangements. Instead, what I read completely shattered my heart as a father. The email said, "Dad, please, don't come to Paris. Jean-Luc and I talked about it, and your presence is going to be an issue. You don't speak French, and honestly, your blue-collar ways will embarrass me in front of the Laurent family. They're aristocrats, Dad. They have high standards, and you're a truck driver. We'll just tell everyone you're sick. I went ahead and canceled your flight. Just wire over the rest of the catering money. We love you, Vanessa." I stared at the screen. I didn't cry, and I didn't yell. I just took another sip of scotch, feeling a cold weight settle in my chest, heavier than any engine block I'd ever hauled. I looked at the transfer confirmation on my screen. $150,000. Processing. My finger hovered over the mouse. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Cancel Transaction. Then I picked up my phone and called my bank's fraud department. I told them to freeze the black card I had given my daughter. When I woke up the next morning, I had 36 missed calls and a voicemail that sounded like a shrieking banshee. Before I tell you how I completely dismantled their little fantasy world, make sure to like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments, if you were in my shoes, would you let your family treat you like an ATM? Now, let me tell you exactly what happens when ungratefulness catches up with you. The silence in my house that night was incredibly heavy. It was the kind of quiet you usually get after a funeral. And in a way, it was a funeral. I was mourning the loss of the little girl I used to carry on my shoulders. I sat in my leather recliner, the leather worn and cracked just like my hands, staring at the digital clock on the cable box. Midnight. The email was still open on my laptop screen. The glow from the monitor was the only light in the room, casting long shadows across the walls. Those were walls I paid to build, under a roof I provided to keep her safe. A life I built for her out of absolutely nothing. I read that sentence again. "You're a truck driver." She wrote it with so much disdain, like it was a dirty word, as if the millions of miles I drove on the interstate, miles that paid for her private school, her horseback riding lessons, and her art degree, meant absolutely nothing. She was right about one thing, though. I am a truck driver. 30 years ago, I started out with a single heavy rig. I slept in the cab, ate canned food, and showered at truck stops. While my friends were buying new cars, I saved every single penny. Today, I own the largest logistics fleet on the East Coast. My net worth is over $50 million. But Vanessa didn't know that. She knew I had trucks, and she knew I had money. But she thought I was just a lucky manager who signed a few good contracts. She thought I lived in this modest 3-bedroom house in New Jersey because it was all I could afford. She didn't know I bought the entire block. She didn't know I owned the building her fiancé lived in. She didn't know that her luxurious life only existed because I was pulling the strings. And she wanted to cut those strings. Or rather, she wanted to keep the strings attached to my wallet while cutting off the connection to me. She wanted to eat the fruit from the tree, but chop it to eat the fruit, but chop it down because the bark was too rough for her delicate hands. I looked back at the transfer screen. Status. Cancelled. Those words looked beautiful. It was the first time in 28 years I had ever said no to her. When she wanted a pony at 5 years old, I got her riding lessons. When she wanted a BMW at 16, I bought her a practical sedan. And she cried until I upgraded it to the top-tier package. When she wanted to spend a year in Italy to find herself at 22, I paid her rent. I created this monster. I knew that. I sat there drinking my scotch, accepting my share of the blame. But accepting it didn't mean giving in. I picked up my phone again. It was 1 in the morning here, which meant it was 7 in the morning in Paris. Or maybe they were still in New York. I didn't care. I dialed the number for the credit card concierge service. The operator answered on the very first ring. "Mr. Carter, how can we help you tonight?" I kept my voice completely flat. "I want to report a security risk on the authorized user card ending in 4598. It's issued to Vanessa Carter." The operator asked if the card was stolen. I said, "No, it's not. It's stolen. It's being used by an unauthorized person. That person is no longer permitted to spend my money. Please flag it as lost or stolen immediately and reject all charges. Effective right now." The operator confirmed. The card has been frozen. I hung up, finished my drink, washed the glass in the sink, turned off the lights, and walked upstairs to my bedroom. My knees creaked. With every step, that was the price of jumping in and out of truck cabs and loading cargo for years. Years of hard labor just to finance her delicate lifestyle. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. I thought I would feel guilty. A father cutting off his kid financially is supposed to feel guilty, right? But I didn't. I felt a strange sense of clarity. It was like driving through a thick fog and suddenly breaking through to a clear sky. I finally saw the road ahead, and for Vanessa, it was going to be an incredibly bumpy ride. I slept wonderfully. Like always, I woke up at 6. Habit is a powerful thing. Habit is a powerful thing. After 40 years of trucking, your internal clock just wakes you up with the sun. I went into the kitchen and turned on the coffee maker. The smell of cheap coffee grounds filled the room. Vanessa always complained about my coffee, saying I should buy an espresso machine and source beans from Ethiopia. But I like my coffee black, strong, and cheap. I poured a cup and walked into the living room. I picked up my phone. The screen lit up with 36 missed calls, 50 text messages, and 14 voicemails. The notifications were cascading down the screen like a waterfall. All from Vanessa. I didn't listen to the voicemails yet. I just scrolled through the texts. The first few were confused. "Dad, the card isn't working. Dad, are you awake? Dad, call the bank." Then they turned angry. "Dad, answer your phone. Dad, I'm at the register, and this is humiliating. Dad, what is going on?" The last few were pure malice. "You did this on purpose. I hate you. You ruined everything." I took a sip of my coffee. It tasted incredible this morning. The phone vibrated in my hand. It was her. I swiped the green button, put it to my ear, but I didn't say hello, I just listened. "You old lunatic!" she screamed. She was yelling so loudly that the microphone distorted. I could hear background noise, people talking, and classical music. She was in a shop playing classical music. "Vanessa," I said. My voice was calm. It was the same voice I used when I had to fire a driver for drinking on the job. Calm, collected, and final. "Don't call me Vanessa," she shrieked. I am standing right in the middle of the Dior boutique. Do you hear me? Dior. I am wearing the wedding dress. The one we picked out. The $20,000 dress. And the card was declined. The woman behind the counter just cut it in half. Dad, she cut it in half. She said it was reported lost. Everyone is looking at me. They think I'm a thief. Fix this right now. Fix it. I took another sip of coffee. I pictured her standing there, probably surrounded by mirrors, silk and satin, her face bright red. Her fiancé, Jean-Luc, was probably pretending to look at a scarf to hide from the embarrassment. I thought you were worried about being embarrassed, Vanessa, I said. What are you talking about? Fix the card. Transfer the money. You sent me an email last night, I said. You told me my presence would embarrass you. You said I was uncultured. You said I was just a truck driver. There was a pause on the line, a very brief one. Then she huffed. This is about that email. Dad, stop being so petty. We can talk about that later. Right now, there is a sales associate looking at me like I'm garbage. Pay for the dress. No, I said. What did you say? I said no. If I am too embarrassing to attend the wedding, then my money is too embarrassing to pay for the dress. Truck driver money is dirty, Vanessa. It's covered in grease and diesel. It would stain that white silks. I'm doing you a favor. I'm saving you from the humiliation of being supported by a blue-collar man. Dad, enough. You are being ridiculous. Jean-Luc is here. His mother is flying in tomorrow. We have a dress fitting scheduled. You promised you would pay for the wedding. I promised to pay for my daughter's wedding, I said. But it seems I don't have a daughter. I just have a critic, a judge. Since I am banned from the event, I assume I am also banned from paying the bills. She started screaming again, rambling about contracts, about how I owed her, about how I was ruining her big day. I hung up. I didn't slam the phone down. I just tapped the red button gently. The piece returned to the kitchen. It was quiet, but I knew it wouldn't last. Vanessa was in New York. New York is only a 90-minute drive from my place in New Jersey. If she was at the Dior on Fifth Avenue, she'd be in a car heading my way within minutes. Jean-Luc would definitely be driving. He'd be driving the Porsche that I paid the lease on. They would come here furious, demanding answers. I stood up and went to the window. I looked out at the front lawn. I cut that grass myself. I built that fence myself. It's a modest house, a good house. It's the house she grew up in. It's the house where I put Band-Aids on her knees. It's the house where I helped her with her homework. And now, she looks at it like it's a shack. She looks at me and only sees a wallet. I walked over to the safe in my closet and spun the dial. Click, click, click. I opened the heavy metal door and pulled out a manila folder. It was thick, packed with files my attorney, Richie, had handed me a week ago. I hadn't wanted to believe it at the time. I had thrown it in the safe, trying to forget about it. Richie had told me, Bill, before you sign those checks, you need to read this. I told him to mind his business. I told him Vanessa was in love. I told him the Laurents were a respectable family. Richie is a good lawyer, and he's also my best friend. We drove trucks together back in the 80s. He went to night school, and I bought more rigs. We both pulled ourselves up from nothing. But Richie never lost his eye for a fraud, and he smelled a fraud in Jean-Luc. I opened the folder. I looked at the photos. I looked at the bank statements Richie had dug up. Atnay dug up. I looked at the truth about that chateau in Bordeaux. I looked at the truth about Jean-Luc's job. I looked at the truth about the Laurent family's noble bloodline. I closed the folder and set it down on the kitchen table. Then I sat down and waited. It took them 2 hours. I heard the engine first. It was that aggressive roar of a sports car, trying too hard to sound important. I looked out the window. The silver Porsche pulled into my driveway. It scraped its bottom on the incline because it sat too low to the ground. Serves him right. Jean-Luc got out first. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my first truck, along with those loafers you wear without socks. He looked at my house with a smirk, saying something to Vanessa. I couldn't hear him, but I could read his body language. He was disgusted. Vanessa stepped out. Her makeup was still there, but it was ruined from crying. They weren't tears of sadness, though. They were tears of pure rage. She marched up the walkway. She didn't knock. She still had a key. I made a mental note to change the locks. The door flew open. They burst into my living room like cops raiding a house. "How dare you?" Vanessa screamed. She threw her purse onto my couch. My leather couch. The one she used to say smelled like an old man. "You stranded us," she yelled. The card was declined at lunch, too. We had to use Jean-Luc's emergency cash. Do you have any idea how humiliating that was? Jean-Luc stood behind her with his arms crossed. He looked around my living room like he was afraid he might catch a disease from the furniture. "Mr. Carter," he said. His accent was thick, or at least he was pretending it was. I had heard him speak perfect English once when he thought I wasn't listening. But around me, he always tried to play the French aristocrat. "Mr. Carter, this is completely unacceptable behavior. In our culture, we respect family agreements. You agreed to pay. You cannot simply withdraw your support over a simple email. This is incredibly childish." I looked at him. I looked at his $3,000 suit. I looked at his manicured hands. Those were hands that had never changed a tire, hands that had never held a wrench. "Sit down," I said. "I am not sitting down," Vanessa yelled. "I want you to unfreeze that card right now. I want you to wire the catering money, and I want an apology, a formal apology. You ruined my dress fitting." I took a sip of my coffee. It was cold by now. I said it again. "Sit down." My voice wasn't loud, but it had the deep rumble of a diesel engine. It was the voice that used to make union bosses sit up straight. Vanessa froze. She looked at me, seeing something she didn't recognize. She saw the CEO, not the father. She sat down on the edge of the armchair. Jean-Luc remained standing, tapping his foot impatiently. "You sent me an email," I said. "You banned me from your wedding." "It wasn't a ban," Jean-Luc said, waving his hand dismissively. "It was a strategic decision. This wedding is a high society event. My family, the Laurents, we have a reputation. We have senators coming. We have dukes coming. Vanessa loves you, but let's be honest, Mr. Carter. You are a simple man. You tell loud jokes. You drink beer straight from the bottle. You don't speak a word of French. You would be uncomfortable. We did this for you." "For me?" I asked. "Yes," Vanessa said, leaning forward. "Dad, you know you hate stuff like this. You hate dressing up. You hate fancy food. You would be miserable. We were just letting you off the hook. You can stay here. You can watch the live stream. We'll set up a special camera just for you. You can drink your beer, sit in your recliner, and be perfectly happy. And we can have our perfect day without worrying about you saying something foolish to account or whoever else." I looked at her. My daughter. I remembered teaching her to ride a bike in this very driveway. I remembered her crying when she scraped her knee. I remembered telling her she was a princess. So I'm an embarrassment, I said. You're just different from them, she said. You're blue-collar, Dad. That's perfectly fine for New Jersey. But this is Paris. This is the Laurent family. Their lineage goes back to kings. Yours goes back to a coal mine in Pennsylvania. It's like mixing oil and water. I looked at Jean-Luc. He was smirking. It was a smug, arrogant grin. He thought he had won. He thought I was just a foolish old man with a checkbook and a massive inferiority complex. I looked at the folder on the table, the folder full of truths about his so-called lineage. All right, I said. All right, I get it. What? Vanessa asked. I get it, I said, leaning back in my chair. I rubbed my face with my hands, letting my shoulders drop. I let myself look smaller, older, and defeated. You're right, I said. I'm just a truck driver. I don't belong in a chateau. I don't want to ruin your big day. Vanessa let out a sigh of relief. She smiled, the kind of smile a predator gives when it sees its prey start to limp. Exactly, Dad. I knew you'd understand. It's really for the best. So, are you going to fix the card issue? Jean-Luc asked. I looked down at his feet, staring right at his pristine shoes. I need a couple of days, I said. A couple of days? Vanessa snapped. Dad, we don't have a couple of days. We fly to Paris on Friday. I have to move some capital around, I lied. I canceled the transaction, and reversing that takes time. Plus, because I was angry, the bank flagged the account for suspected fraud. I have to physically go into the branch, sign documents, and go through the proper channels. It's a whole process. How long exactly? Jean-Luc demanded. 2 days, I replied. Give me 2 days, and I'll get the funds sorted out. I'll take care of the catering bill, and I'll pay for the dress. And you're staying here? Vanessa asked, making sure. I'm staying right here, I promised. I won't be in Paris. I won't embarrass either of you. Jean-Luc clapped his hands together with a smug grin. Excellent. Very sensible. That is the correct decision, Mr. Carter. You are showing some real wisdom here. Vanessa stood up and grabbed her purse. Fine, 2 days. But I need cash right now, Dad. That card is completely dead, and I have appointments. I need cash. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my money clip. It was about $200 in $20 bills. I tossed it onto the table. That's all the cash I have on me, I said. She stared at the stack of bills like it was a dirty paper towel. $200? This won't even cover lunch. It's all I've got, I replied. Until I can get to the bank. She snatched the money off the table anyway. Fine, whatever. Just make sure the wire goes through. We have our final rehearsal check-in with the wedding planner on Thursday. If the funds aren't there, they're going to cancel the venue. I know, I said. I'll handle it. She turned and walked toward the door without giving me a hug or even saying thank you. She just walked out, with Jean-Luc following close behind. He paused at the door, looking back at me one last time. You made the right call, he said. Stick to what you know. Leave the rest of the world to us. He stepped outside, and a moment later, I heard the Porsche start up and roar down the street. I sat there in the silence, staring at the empty space where my daughter had just been standing, right where she had snatched that $200. Stick to what you know, he had said. A smile crept across my face. It wasn't a friendly smile. It was the grin of a wolf that had just spotted its prey. I know logistics, Jean-Luc, I said to the empty room. I know exactly how to move things from point A to point B. And I know exactly how to cut off a supply line. I picked up the manila folder from the table, opened it, and looked at the name of the Paris bank where Jean-Luc claimed his family trust was held. I looked at the name of the real estate holding company that supposedly owned the chateau. I picked up my phone and called Richie. "Richie," I said. "Hey, Bill," he answered, sounding like he was chewing on a sandwich. "You were right," I told him. "I know I was right. About which part?" "All of it. They just left. They told me I'm too blue-collar to go to Paris. They want me to stay home and just mail the checks." I heard Richie stop chewing. "That ungrateful little brat. What did you do?" "I told them I'd handle it. I told them to give me 2 days." "Why, Bill? Why give them 2 days? Cut them off right now." "No," I said. "If I cut them off now, they'll just resent me and move on. They'll look for their next target, and they'll make up some story about how I abandoned them. I want to close this chapter properly." "What are you planning, Bill?" "I need you to book a private jet," I said. "A private jet? You just said you weren't going." I lied. "I am going to Paris, Richie, but I am not going as the father of the bride." "Then who are you going as?" "I'm going as the guy who holds all the cards," I said. Richie burst into a deep, hearty laugh. "Oh, this is going to be absolutely spectacular. When do we leave?" "Tonight," I said. "Bring your best suit. We're going to gatecrash a dinner reservation." I hung up, stood up, and walked over to the window to look out at the street. My daughter wanted a lesson in class. She wanted to talk about bloodlines, aristocracy, and worth. Fine. I'd give her a lesson. I'd teach her never to judge a book by its cover, especially when that book owns the entire library. I went upstairs to pack my bags. I didn't pack a tuxedo. I packed my work boots, my jeans, and the most dangerous things I owned. My American Express black card and a folder packed with proof. They wanted the truck driver. Well, they were going to get him. But they forgot one simple thing. A truck driver knows exactly how to clear the road. About 20 minutes after Vanessa and Jean-Luc drove off in their rented Porsche one, I pulled my pickup truck into the parking lot of Sal's diner. This wasn't the kind of place where you'd ever find French aristocrats. It was filled with folks drinking coffee that tasted like battery acid, the real people who actually built this country. The neon sign buzzed weakly, and the air was thick with bacon grease and diesel exhaust. To me, it smelled like home. To my daughter, it probably smelled like failure. I walked inside, and Brenda, the waitress, nodded at me while pouring coffee. She didn't even ask what I wanted. She just pointed toward the corner booth. Richie was already waiting for me. If you looked at Richie Banks, you'd see a man in a faded flannel shirt with a mustard stain on the collar and knuckles that looked like they'd been broken a few times. You'd probably assume he made a living fixing transmissions, and you would be completely wrong. Richie was the sharpest corporate attorney on the East Coast. He graduated top of his class from Yale Law, but he absolutely hated suits and boardrooms. He preferred doing business right here, tearing hedge fund managers apart over the phone while eating a meatloaf sandwich and drinking a soda. As I slid into the booth, the vinyl seat groaned under my weight. He looked up, skipping the pleasantries entirely. "You look like you just got run over by your own fleet, Bill," Richie said, getting straight to the point. That was exactly why I liked him. "I definitely feel like it," I replied, gesturing to Brenda for a cup of coffee. Richie slid a manila folder across the sticky table, right past a dried smudge of syrup. "Let's get the good news out of the way first," he said, chewing on a French fry. "The acquisition of the Midwest distribution hub is officially finalized." I took care of their legal team this morning, and they folded. You now control the shipping routes from Ohio all the way to Nebraska. I nodded and took the folder without opening it. I already knew what was inside. What's the valuation, Richie? I asked. He wiped his mouth with a napkin. With the new assets and the government contracts we locked in last month, your fleet is officially valued at $52 million. The holding company has about $8 million in liquid assets. Personally, your net worth puts you comfortably in the top 1% of the state. Congratulations, you old blue-collar hustler. 52 million, I repeated quietly. It was just a number. It meant I had won the game of capitalism. I started with a beat-up Ford and a dream, and now I owned an empire. But sitting there with my daughter's voice still echoing in my ears, $52 million felt like pocket change. It could buy a fleet of trucks, but it couldn't buy her respect. She has no idea, does she? Richie asked, reading the expression on my face. He knew me better than anyone. We used to dig ditches together long before he went to law school, and I bought my first big rig. None, I said. She thinks I'm a dispatcher. She thinks I just manage the fleet instead of owning it. She thinks that modest house in New Jersey is everything I have. You kept it from her on purpose? Why? Richie asked, pointing a fry at me. Because I wanted to keep her grounded. And how did that turn out? I took a sip of the scalding hot coffee Brenda had just brought over. It turned out terribly, Richie. She just banned me from her wedding. Richie stopped chewing and dropped the fry back onto his plate. His eyes narrowed, and his lawyer persona immediately took over. The shark that eats CEOs for breakfast was awake. Say that again, he said, his voice dropping an octave. She banned me from attending. I told him the whole story. I told him about the email, the black card, and how they came to my house demanding answers. I told him how Jean-Luc stood in my living room, wearing a suit I paid for, telling me I was too uncultured to be around his family. I told him how Vanessa said I was just a truck driver and that we simply didn't mix. Richie listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker by the second. His jaw clenched tightly. So, let me get this straight, Richie said slowly. You just paid $300,000 for a party you're not even invited to, and you're just letting them treat you like staff. I leaned forward, making the table shake slightly. I'm not letting them do anything, Richie. I told them I'd handle it, and I told them I'd send the money in 2 days. You lied, Richie said, a dangerous, wicked smile spreading across his face. I lied, I confirmed. I'm not sending a single penny. I'm going to Paris, Richie, and you're coming with me. Richie let out a sharp laugh that made a few truck drivers at the counter turn around. I knew it, he said. I knew you wouldn't just take this lying down. So, what's the plan? We go over there, throw your bank statements in their faces, and watch them beg? That's too easy. If you just show them the money, they'll apologize, sure. But it'll be fake. They'll love the 50 million, not the father. I don't want their fake affection, Richie. I want to shatter that illusion entirely. I want to expose them. I tapped the folder Richie had just given me regarding the business expansion. You uncovered the logistics of the Midwest deal in 3 days, I said. You dug up history on a company that had been clean for 20 years. Richie shrugged. I'm good at what I do. I need you to be even better, I told him. I need you to dig deep into the Laurent family. Jean-Luc claims they're aristocrats. He claims they own a chateau in Bordeaux and come from old money. Richie snorted. Old money families don't rent a Porsche, Bill. Old money drives a 10-year-old Volvo, and wears sweaters with holes in them. New money screams, old money whispers. Jean-Luc is putting on a show. Exactly, I said. My gut tells me he's a fraud. He talks about bloodlines and connections far too much, and Vanessa is so blinded by the idea of being a princess that she hasn't verified a single fact. I want a complete investigative file, Richie. I want to know where they bank, who actually holds the deed to that chateau, if Jean-Luc has ever held a real job in his life, and everything else in between. I want to know it all. Richie pulled a small notebook from his pocket and clicked a cheap plastic pen. I can have the preliminary details by tomorrow morning, he said. I have a contact in Zurich and another in Lyon. If these people have debts, I'll find them. If they have a record, I'll find it. If they're fakes, I'll peel back the layers like an onion. Good, I said. What about the wedding itself, Bill? Richie asked, looking up from his notes. The contracts, I smiled. It was the same smile I used back in '98 when negotiating through a union strike. You're the lawyer, Richie. You tell me. I signed the venue contract and my name is on the catering deposit. Legally speaking, who actually owns that wedding? Richie's smile grew even wider. You do. You're the client on record. So, if I decide to change the guest list, I said, or if I decide to alter the menu, or if I decide to turn the reception into a corporate retreat for my top drivers, that's entirely my right. Correct? It's your party, Bill, Richie said. You can cry if you want to, or you can make them cry. I finished my coffee and slammed a $20 bill onto the table. Get me that information, Richie. We fly out tomorrow night. I'm walking into that rehearsal, dinner, fully armed. Richie pocketed his notebook, stood up, and clapped me hard on the shoulder. They picked the wrong truck driver, Bill. We walked out of the diner into the cool night air. The parking lot was filled with 18-wheelers, their idling engines creating a powerful chorus of industry. These were my people. This was my world. Honest work and honest sweat. Vanessa wanted a fairy tale. She wanted a chateau and a prince. I climbed into my pickup truck, watching Richie get into his old Ford Taurus. Two men, worth tens of millions of dollars, leaving a greasy diner. She was going to get her fairy tale, but she forgot that in the original stories, the wolf always catches up with those who stray from the path. And I was completely done playing the savior. It was time to let the wolf out. At 3 a.m, Richie came back to my house. I hadn't slept a wink. I was sitting at the kitchen table with an empty coffee cup and a bottle of antacids in front of me. The house was entirely quiet, but it felt like the buildup of pressure inside a boiler. I heard Richie's car pull into the driveway and the door slam shut. He didn't even knock. He just walked right in. He looked exhausted, his eyes bloodshot and his tie completely loosened. In his hands, he wasn't carrying a thin folder. He was holding a thick cardboard file box. A whole box. He thudded it down onto the table with a heavy sound that felt like a judge's gavel striking a desk. It sounded like a final sentence. I looked at the box, then looked up at Richie. Is it bad? I asked. Richie walked over to the fridge, grabbed a can of beer, popped the tab, and took a long swig. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. Bill, he said. Bad isn't the right word. Bad implies there's still some good mixed in there. Bad means a mistake was made. This isn't a mistake. This is a complete disaster. This is a massive fire in a dynamite factory. He sat down across from me and tapped the lid of the box. I woke up my contact in Lyon. He charged me double for the rush job. Then I called an old acquaintance at Interpol who handles financial fraud. He owed me a favor from back in the day, and between the two of them, we completely turned the Laurent family's digital footprint upside down. He opened the box, revealing a stash stuffed with papers, bank statements, property deeds, court documents, and police reports. "Where do you want to start?" Richie asked. "Do you want the fake chateau, the fake jobs, or the fake parents first?" "Let's start with the chateau," I said. That was the main selling point. Vanessa hasn't stopped talking about that ancestral estate for 6 months. She showed me photos of the towers and the vineyards. Richie pulled out a stack of papers clipped together and slid them across the table. "Here's the deed," he said. Or rather, the lack of one. The Chateau de Saint-Michel does not belong to the Laurent family. It never has. It's owned by a hospitality holding company based out of Dubai. It's a wedding venue, Bill. A rental. You can literally book it online if you have enough reward points. I stared at the paperwork. It was a standard commercial lease agreement. Jean-Luc told Vanessa it had been in his family since the 18th century, I said. He also told her the wine for the reception came from his grandfather's vineyard. Jean-Luc is a complete fraud, Richie said. The only thing his grandfather left him was a knack for lying. The Laurents rent the place for 2 weeks every year just to put on appearances. They take photos, throw parties, and play the role of estate owners. Then they pack up their fake designer luggage and head right back to reality. "And what exactly is their reality?" I asked. Richie pulled out another stack of documents, even thicker this time, stamped with official red ink. "Bankruptcy," he said. Pierre and Geneviève Laurent filed for bankruptcy back in 2019. They owned a chain of dry cleaners in Marseille that was actually a front for shifting illicit funds. The French government seized everything: their apartment in Paris, their vehicles, and their accounts. They have absolutely nothing left. Bill, they live off credit cards opened under other people's names, and they've been bouncing checks across 3 different countries. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach. My daughter wasn't just joining another family, she was marrying into a walking financial crime scene. "What about Jean-Luc?" I asked, looking at my attorney. "What does this supposed prince actually do for a living?" Richie let out a dry, humorless chuckle. "Jean-Luc calls himself a consultant. But do you want to know what he actually consults on?" I shook my head. "Roulette wheels," Richie said flatly. "He's a gambler, Bill, and a terrible one at that. He's been blacklisted from 2 casinos in Monaco and another in Macau. Right now, he owes a private lender in Nice, a cool 180,000 euros. And these aren't the kinds of people who send polite late notices, Bill. They're the type who break kneecaps to collect their interest." Richie slid a grainy, black and white surveillance photo across the table. It showed Jean-Luc outside a nightclub, looking absolutely terrified while arguing with a man in a heavy leather jacket. I picked up the photo, my hands shaking. It wasn't out of fear, though. It was pure, unadulterated rage. "So, this entire wedding," I muttered, pieces finally falling into place. "The $300,000. Richie nodded slowly, taking another sip of his beer. "You're a smart man, Bill. You understand logistics. You know how to track a route. Why do you think they were so desperate for you to wire the cash directly to their personal account in France, instead of paying the vendors yourself? Why do you think they threw a tantrum the second you canceled that wire?" "Because they never had any intention of paying the vendors," I said, the realization hitting me like a physical blow. "Exactly," Richie confirmed. They needed your 300 grand to pay off the high-interest debt in Nice. They needed it to keep Pierre from going to prison for tax evasion. They needed it to keep the lights on in whatever apartment they're renting. This wedding isn't a celebration, Bill. It's a shakedown. They're robbing you blind, and they're using Vanessa as the getaway driver. I stood up and walked over to the window. Outside, the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon, turning the sky a deep, bruised purple. I looked out at the quiet street, my mind racing back to Vanessa, her arrogant attitude from yesterday, and the sheer disgust in her eyes when she looked at my home. "She's so blind," I whispered. "She honestly thinks she's marrying royalty. She thinks she's moving up in the world, leaving her truck driver father behind to join high society. But she's just the mark. She's a victim who happens to have a wealthy dad." Richie walked up beside me, his expression grave. "She's a hostage, Bill. That's exactly what she is. But she's a hostage who fell in love with her captor. She's the one holding the gun to her own head." "Does she know?" I asked. "Does she have any idea?" Richie shrugged. "I highly doubt it. Jean-Luc has charm. He's a professional con artist. That's his livelihood. He probably showed her fake deeds, took her to that rented chateau, and spun elaborate stories about his ancestors. And the truth is, she wanted to believe it, Bill. That's the real issue here. She was so desperate to escape her roots and erase where she came from that she bought into the fairy tale completely. She was blinded by the glamour and totally missed the rot underneath." I turned around and walked back to the table, staring at the box of evidence. It felt like a casket for my daughter's future. If I let her go through with this marriage, she would be completely ruined. They would drain her bank accounts, destroy her credit, use her to get to my money, and then discard her like a blown-out tire the second the cash ran out. "I have to tell her," I said, reaching for my phone. "I need to call her right now and show her all of this." Richie reached out and put a firm hand on my arm, stopping me. "Think about this logically, Bill. Look at the last 24 hours. Right now, she resents you. She thinks you're just a bitter, small-minded old man trying to ruin her happiness out of spite. If you call her up right now and tell her that her prince is actually a beggar, she won't believe a word of it. She'll think you fabricated the whole thing to sabotage her. She'll run straight into his arms, and he'll spin a lie about how you paid to forge these documents. He'll turn her against you forever." I looked at Richie. He was right. He was always right, which is exactly why I paid him the big bucks. "So what am I supposed to do?" I asked, frustration bubbling up. "Just sit back and watch her walk off a cliff? Watch her destroy her entire life?" "No," Richie said, a sharp glint in his eye. "We go to Paris. We stick to the timeline. You don't tell her the truth. You show her. You show everyone. Or wait until they're all trapped in the exact same room, right when the lies are piled so high that the whole tower is ready to tip over. And then you kick out the foundation." I looked back down at the box. I pulled out a bank statement belonging to Pierre Laurent. The balance showed a negative 14,000 euros, filled with charges from liquor stores and online gambling websites. "These people called me simple and uncultured," I said, my voice dropping to a low growl. "They stood in my living room and told me I wasn't worthy of sitting at their table. They were projecting," Richie said. "They were throwing their own failures onto you. They hate you because you're the real deal. You have actual wealth, genuine success, and real dirt under your fingernails. They're just ghosts, Bill. They're smoke and mirrors, and they're absolutely terrified that you're going to blow their house. down. I sat back down, pulled the box closer, and started reading. I went through every single page. I read the foreclosure notices on the dry cleaners. I read the police report from 2015 when Jean-Luc was arrested for passing bad checks. I read the desperate emails from Genevieve begging creditors for just a little more time. With every page I turned, my heartache transformed into something else entirely. It hardened into a cold, unbreakable resolve. Vanessa was my daughter. I loved her, but she was being a fool. She had let her vanity become her ultimate weakness. And her embarrassment toward me had left her completely blind to the danger right in front of her face. A simple warning wouldn't save her now. Warnings were too soft. She needed absolute shock therapy. She needed to see the monster clearly once the mask was ripped away. I closed the box. Outside, the morning was fully alive and the birds were singing. It was going to be a beautiful day in New Jersey. "Pack your bags, Richie," I said. Richie smiled, finishing his beer. "The jet is already fueled up and waiting at Teterboro," he said. "We can be in Paris by tomorrow morning." I stood up, suddenly feeling a surge of energy. It felt exactly like being back in the cab of my very first truck, hauling a massive load through a blinding blizzard. I knew the road ahead was dangerous and the ice was slick, but I also knew I had more than enough horsepower to plow right through it. "I'm not paying for a wedding anymore," I said. "Nope," Richie agreed. "But I am paying for a lesson," I said. "And it's going to be the most expensive lesson they've ever learned." I walked into my bedroom, opened the closet, and pushed past my few standard suits. Reaching all the way into the back, I pulled out my old leather jacket, the one I wore when I first started the company. It was heavily worn and still carried a faint scent of motor oil. Vanessa absolutely detested it, claiming it made me look like a thug. I slipped it on. It still fit like a glove. Looking in the mirror, I didn't see a corporate CEO or a millionaire. I saw Bill Carter, truck driver, father, and the man who was about to drop the hammer. "We're going to Paris, Richie," I said, turning around. "And we're going to introduce the Laurent family to a little thing called foreclosure." Richie grabbed the file box. "I'll drive," he said. We walked out to the pickup truck. I didn't look back at the house once. The house was the past. Paris was the future, and I was bringing a storm straight toward it. The entire ride to the airport was dead silent. I kept thinking about Jean-Luc's arrogant smirk, the way he looked down at my shoes, and the patronizing tone he used when calling me Mr. Carter. He wanted a handout. He wanted a bailout. But what he was actually about to get was a massive dose of reality. I glanced at the box sitting on Richie's lap. That box held something far more valuable than cash. It held the absolute truth, and the truth is the one thing that can never be bought. Vanessa thought she was simply erasing me from her wedding and cutting me out of her life. But she was about to learn a very hard lesson. You can never erase the man who built the very road you're driving on. An hour later, we were in the air on the private jet. As the plane climbed into the clouds, leaving New Jersey far behind, I looked down at the sprawling interstate system below, the massive arteries of commerce I had spent my life working on, and ordered a glass of scotch. "To family," Richie said, raising his glass. "To family," I replied, "and to taking out the trash." I took a sip. It burned perfectly all the way down. Paris was waiting. The Laurents were waiting. Right about now, they were probably laughing, drinking champagne they couldn't afford, and toasting to the foolish American truck driver who was funding their lavish lifestyle. Ozzy. Let them laugh. Let them enjoy the champagne while it lasted. Because it was going to be the very last vintage they would ever taste. Bill Carter was on his way, and I was bringing the entire bill with me. We touched down at Le Bourget Airport just as the sun was setting over Paris. The gray, gloomy sky matched my mood perfectly. I watched the rain streak across the window as the Gulfstream taxied into a private hangar. Richie was already on the phone. Barker orders to his team back in New York to ensure every single piece of paperwork was flawlessly lined up for the ambush. I just stared out at the tarmac. This was the city of light, the city of romance, and I was arriving to wage war for the sake of my own flesh and blood. We checked into the peninsula. I couldn't care less about the thread count of the sheets or the view of the Eiffel Tower. My only concerns were a secure Wi-Fi connection and the conference table inside our suite. Richie immediately set up his war room, spreading out the Laurent family, files like a general planning, a major invasion. I poured myself a drink. It was time to make the call. The phone felt incredibly heavy in my hand. This was going to be the hardest part. I had to pull off a massive lie. I had to convince Vanessa that I was a beaten dog, rolling over and showing my belly. I needed her to believe that her insults had worked, that I felt completely ashamed, and that I had surrendered. It went against every single fiber of my being. I was a man who had stared down powerful union bosses and aggressive corporate raiders without ever backing down. But for this trap to work flawlessly, she had to believe she had won. I dialed her number. It rang 4 times. She was likely filtering my calls, expecting me to beg for forgiveness. "Hello." Her voice was sharp, dripping with impatience. "Vanessa," I said, dropping my tone to sound exhausted and defeated. "Dad," she sighed heavily. "I told you I don't have time for this. We're at the venue and the florist is being an absolute nightmare. Unless you're calling to tell me the wire went through, I'm hanging up." "I'm in Paris," I said simply. The line went completely dead. A long, freezing silence stretched between us. "What?" she gasped. "You're in Paris? I explicitly told you not to come. I made it perfectly clear you weren't welcome. Jean-Luc said it would be an absolute disaster. Why can't you just listen to me for once?" "I'm not here for the wedding," I lied, clenching my jaw to force the words out. "I won't be at the ceremony, Vanessa. I'm respecting your wishes. I know I'd just embarrass you, and I know I don't fit into your world." "Then why on earth are you here?" she demanded. "I came to handle the financial side," I said. "I told you the bank blocked the transfer. Because of the size of the funds, I had to physically sign the release paperwork. I brought the remaining money with me, the check for the caterers, the check for the dress, everything." I could hear her breathing shift on the other end. The anger was still there, but now it was mixed with pure greed. The shark had caught the scent of blood in the water. "You brought the money?" she asked, her tone softening slightly. "I did," I said, "but I can't just hand it over blindly. Vanessa, Richie is here with me." "Richie? Why is your attorney there?" "Because we are dealing with a massive sum of capital," I explained smoothly. "I intend to transfer a very large portion of my liquid assets to you as a wedding gift, but to keep it tax-free. To ensure the French government doesn't take 40% of it, we need to structure it as a family trust." "A trust?" She sounded skeptical, but intrigued. "It's to protect you," I said. "It secures the assets strictly in your name. But there is one condition." "What condition?" "Jean-Luc and his parents need to sign a waiver," I said. "It's a standard document stating they acknowledge the funds are a personal gift to you, which protects the money from any potential future creditors. It's pure formality. Richie says we can handle the whole thing in 20 minutes over dinner. I held my breath. This was the hook. If she took the bait of the cash, she would swallow the rest of the trap. I don't know, Dad. She hesitated. Jean-Luc's parents are incredibly busy. They have fittings, social events. They don't exactly want to have dinner with you. Tell them I leave first thing in the morning, I said, putting a slight crack in my voice for dramatic effect. Tell them I just want to sign the papers, hand over the checks, and get right back on the plane. I won't even stay for dessert. I just want to make sure my little girl is taken care of. It was a beautiful touch. She hesitated again. I could hear her muffling the phone, talking to someone in a hurried whisper. Likely. Jean-Luc. I heard the low murmur of French before she came back on the line. How much money is in the trust, exactly? She asked. $3 million, I stated flatly. I heard a sharp intake of breath. That number was big enough to bury any doubts she had. It was more than enough to make those fake aristocrats salivate. Fine, she said, her voice suddenly turning sweet, a completely fake, plastic sweetness. Fine, Dad. We can do dinner. But it has to be tonight, and it needs to be somewhere private. We don't want a scene. I'll book a table at L'Ambroisie. 8 o'clock at L'Ambroisie, I agreed. She sounded mildly impressed. That's actually acceptable. Jean-Luc loves that place. It's 3 Michelin stars. I know, I said. Richie already booked the private dining room. Just us. No onlookers, no embarrassment for you. Perfect, she said. We'll be there. But Dad, please don't wear that old leather jacket. And don't tell that story about hauling fertilizer to Kentucky. Just sign the papers and let us have our dinner. I promise, I said. I'll be like a ghost, just a signature on a check. Good. See you at 8. She hung up. I set the phone down on the table, my hands vibrating from the sheer adrenaline. The trap was set. They were coming for the $3 million, ready to sign the very papers they thought would secure their high society lifestyle. They had absolutely no idea that the documents Richie was prepping weren't for a trust at all. It was an admission of reality. Richie looked up from his laptop as the printer in the corner started humming, spitting out page after page. They took the bait? He asked. Hook, line, and sinker, I said. They'll be at L'Ambroisie at 8. Richie let out a low whistle. L'Ambroisie, you're really going all out. That dinner alone is going to run at least $5,000. Think of it as a final meal on death row, I said coldly. Let them enjoy it. I walked over to the printer and picked up the fresh pages. It was a prenuptial agreement drafted by Richie, but it was far from standard. It was a document that meticulously detailed every single cent of debt the Laurent family carried, shifting the liability completely. If anyone actually read it, it would reveal that I knew absolutely everything. But they wouldn't read it. They would be far too busy staring at the fake $3 million check I was going to place on the table. They would be too busy drinking expensive wine, blinded by their own greed, to notice the steel jaws of the trap closing around their legs. I went into the bathroom to shave, looking at the reflection in the mirror. I looked tired and aged from the stress of the past few days. But there was a fire in my eyes that I hadn't seen in decades. The exact same fire of the young man who built an empire out of the cab of a truck. I shaved cleanly and trimmed my mustache. Walking back into the room, I opened my luggage. I didn't reach for the jeans or the work boots. Instead, I pulled out a custom charcoal gray Italian wool suit I had bought 5 years ago for an awards gala I never ended up attending. It fit like armor. I put on a crisp white shirt, tied a silk tie, and fastened the cufflinks Vanessa had given me for Christmas a decade ago. Back before she stopped buying me gifts entirely. Richie let out a whistle when he saw me. "You clean up pretty good, Bill. You look like a senator or a hitman." "Tonight I'm a bit of both," I said. We left the hotel at 7:30. The rain had cleared up, leaving the wet streets reflecting the glow of the streetlights. Paris was beautiful. But it was a shame I was to burn a massive hole right through the center of it. We took the hotel's black Mercedes sedan. Sitting in the back, watching the city blur past the window, I wondered where exactly I had gone wrong with Vanessa. I wondered if there was a single moment I could have changed things. Maybe if I had spent more time at home. Or if I hadn't spoiled her so completely. But regret is useless on the highway. Once the rig is moving, you can't back up. You just have to keep driving. We arrived at the Place des Vosges. The restaurant was tucked away in a quiet corner, incredibly low-key and elegant. The kind of place where money speaks in whispers. The maître greeted us with a slight bow. He knew exactly who I was, not because I was famous, but because I had bought the entire building through a shell company 3 years ago as a real estate investment. Richie had set it up. I had never even eaten here before, but tonight I was the landlord. "Mr. Carter," the maitre d' murmured politely, "your guests have arrived. They are waiting in the private dining room." "Are they drinking?" I asked. They ordered a bottle of 1990 Romanée Conti. Of course they did, I thought to myself. A $20,000 bottle of wine. They were already celebrating how they were going to spend my money before they even had it. "Put it on my tab," I said. "Let them drink." Richie and I walked through the main dining room. It was dead silent, perfectly elegant, filled with people speaking in hushed whispers and eating food that looked like actual jewelry. I felt massive and incredibly awkward in there, but at the exact same time, I felt immensely powerful. We approached the heavy oak doors of the private dining room, and I could hear laughter bleeding through the wood. It was Jean-Luc's voice, sharp, condescending, and arrogant. I paused, straightened my cuffs, and looked over at Richie. He gave me a firm nod, patting the chest pocket of his suit where the files were hidden. "Showtime, Bill," he whispered. I pushed the doors open. The laughter cut off instantly. They were all gathered around a large round table, draped in crisp white linen. Jean-Luc, Vanessa, and 2 people who were unmistakably Pierre and Geneviève Laurent. They looked exactly like their file photos. Pierre was stuffed into a suit that was far too tight, his face bright red from the alcohol. Geneviève was absolutely covered in jewelry that I now knew was completely fake, or at least pawned to the hilt. Vanessa looked stunning, I had to admit. She wore a beautiful white dress with her hair swept up high, looking exactly like the princess she had always desperately wanted to be. But the second her eyes landed on me, her face completely dropped. She stared at my custom suit, then at Richie, looking utterly bewildered. "Dad," she stammered, You look different." I walked over to the empty chair at the head of the table. I didn't smile, and I didn't reach out for a hug. "Good evening," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm and controlled. Jean-Luc half stood from his chair, glances flicking rapidly between my suit and his parents. He looked completely thrown off. "Mr. Carter," he stammered, trying to regain his footing. "We were just raising a toast to family." Please, sit. I took my seat and locked eyes with Pierre and Genevieve. They were staring at me with a dangerous mix of curiosity and utter disdain. They saw the expensive suit, sure, but all they really saw was the simple truck driver. They saw an easy mark waiting to be taken for everything he had. Vanessa, I said quietly, introduce everyone. She cleared her throat nervously. Mom, Dad, this is my father, William Carter, and his associate. This is Richard Banks, I corrected, gesturing to Richie. My chief legal counsel. Pierre raised an eyebrow, a smug look on his face. Counsel? Is a lawyer really necessary for a simple family dinner? When we are discussing a trust of this magnitude, it is absolutely necessary, Richie replied. He set his briefcase on the table and clicked the latches open. In the quiet room, the sound snapped like a gunshot. Genevieve let out a tight, predatory smile. Of course, we understand. Business is business. We are just so incredibly grateful, William, that you decided to support the children. It is a very noble gesture. Her English was heavily accented, sounding completely rehearsed. It's not a gesture, I said flatly. It's an investment. The waiter poured me a glass of the $20,000 wine. I didn't touch it. I just stared at the dark liquid. So, I said, hovering my hand right over where the checks were kept. Before we sign anything, and before I hand over these funds, I want to hear about the wedding. I want to hear about this family I'm supposedly merging with. Tell me, Pierre. Tell me all about that chateau. Pierre puffed out his chest proudly. Ah, the chateau. It is the absolute crown jewel of the Laurent heritage. It has been in our family for 6 generations. The history behind it is truly staggering. I'm sure it is, I murmured. And what about the vineyards? They produce the finest grapes in all of Bordeaux, he bragged. We export exclusively to private collectors. I nodded slowly, then turned my gaze to Jean-Luc. And what about you, son? How is your consulting firm doing? Jean-Luc swirled his wine glass with an arrogant smirk. Booming, he stated. The markets are incredibly volatile right now, and people need expert guidance. I have clients in Dubai and London. Honestly, I'm actually turning business away at this point. Vanessa beamed, looking at me with an expression that screamed. I told you so. Sounds very impressive, I said. It is, but it can be quite a burden at times. Genevieve sighed dramatically. The heavy responsibility of wealth, the upkeep of tradition. You Americans are incredibly lucky. You have new money, which makes things so much simpler. An old money lineage, it is a very heavy crown to wear. I glanced at Richie. He was doing everything in his power not to burst out laughing. Well, I said, I'd love to help lighten that burden. That's exactly why we're here today. Richie pulled the paperwork from his briefcase, setting a thick stack of documents directly in front of me. Then, he placed a check right on top. I watched their eyes lock onto that check. Pierre leaned forward, practically drooling, while Genevieve subtly licked her lips. $3 million, sitting right there within their reach. But first, I said, placing my hand firmly over the check, we take care of the paperwork. Richie handed out copies of the agreement to everyone at the table. This is the trust agreement. I lied smoothly. It outlines the transfer of assets and includes the waiver clause we discussed. Essentially, it states that once this money is transferred, you accept it as the final, full financial contribution from the Carter family. There will be no future claims, and absolutely none of your liabilities can ever be transferred to Vanessa. Legally, It separates her assets from yours permanently. Jean-Luc waved his hand dismissively. Standard operating procedure. Standard terms. Where exactly do we sign? He snatched up a pen, not even bothering to glance at the first page. Pierre slipped on his reading glasses, frowning as he looked at the cover. This seems exceptionally thick for a simple waiver, he noted. It's thorough, Richie countered seamlessly. We want to ensure every single party is completely protected, especially considering international tax laws. Just sign it, Pierre, Vanessa pleaded, looking anxious. Please, the food is about to be served and Dad is on a tight schedule. Let's not complicate things. Genevieve nudged Pierre hard with her elbow. Sign it, darling. We trust William. He is family now. Pierre hesitated for a split second, then shrugged and flipped straight to the signature page. I watched them intently. I watched the tip of his pen hover right above the paper. I waited until the exact moment the metal touched the signature line. Actually, I spoke up. Pierre froze, looking up at me. I forgot to mention one tiny detail. I said, What detail? Jean-Luc asked, a bead of sweat forming on his brow. I picked up my wineglass and took a slow, deliberate sip. It was an incredible vintage, complex and heavy. I looked directly at Jean-Luc. I forgot to ask about the rent, I said coldly. The rent for that chateau, considering it actually belongs to a hospitality group out of Dubai, and the rent on that apartment in Paris, since the bank officially seized that property back in 2019. The silence that crashed over the room was instant and violent. Jean-Luc dropped his pen. It rolled across the linen table and clicked onto the hardwood floor. Pierre ripped off his glasses, his hands trembling violently. What? What are you talking about? Vanessa let out a forced, nervous laugh. Dad, you've got it all mixed up. The chateau belongs to his family. Is that so? I asked. I gave Richie a nod. He reached directly into the file box we had brought from the hotel. He pulled out the deeds. He pulled out the bankruptcy filings. He pulled out the police reports. He began throwing them down onto the table, like dealer handing out playing cards. One in front of Pierre, one in front of Genevieve, and one right in front of Jean-Luc. This is the commercial lease agreement for the chateau, Richie announced, his voice echoing in the small room. This is the foreclosure notice for the dry cleaners. And this, right here, is the court judgment for the 180,000 euros Jean-Luc owes to a specific gentleman in Cisse. I watched their faces entirely collapse. The arrogance vanished instantly. The high society nobility evaporated into thin air, leaving nothing behind but raw, ugly terror. Vanessa snatched up the paper in front of Jean-Luc, her eyes scanning the text. Her face went deathly pale. She turned to him, her voice a fragile whisper. What is this? It's a lie! Jean-Luc roared, slamming his hands down and knocking his chair backward as he stood up. This man is lying. He's trying to ruin us. He forged all of this. Did I? I asked calmly. I pulled out my phone, dialed a number, and hit the speakerphone button. Who are you calling? Genevieve shrieked. I'm calling the concierge at the chateau, I said. Let's ask him directly who actually owns the property. Jean-Luc lunged across the table, desperately scratching to grab the phone out of my hand. Sit down, I boomed. I slammed my fist onto the table with the full force of a man who spent 40 years working heavy machinery. The plates rattled violently, and the wine glasses shook. The truck driver was out. The man who could change a tire in a blinding blizzard, the man who wasn't about to be intimidated by a group of cheap frauds. Jean-Luc froze instantly, dropping heavily back into his chair. "You are criminals," I said, my voice dropping to a low, lethal growl. "You are completely bankrupt. You are liars. You tried to sell my daughter a fairy tale, just so you could pay off your gambling debts." I looked over at Vanessa. She was crying now, silent tears streaming down her pale face as she stared at the documents, then back at Jean-Luc. For the first time in 6 months, she was finally seeing him for exactly who he was. "Dad," she whispered brokenly, "is this real?" I looked at her, my heart aching but my voice firm. "It's all real, Vanessa. Your prince is a beggar, and your chateau is a rental." I picked up the $3 million check, holding it up so every single one of them could see it clearly. "And this," I said, "this was the only thing that could have saved you." I ripped the check clean down the middle. Then I ripped it again, letting the shredded pieces fall onto the table like confetti. "Dinner is served," I said coldly, but I seemed to have completely lost my appetite. I stood up, and Richie immediately followed suit. "We're leaving," I said. "Wait," Pierre stammered, his voice shaking as he reached out a trembling hand. "Wait, Mr. Carter. We can explain. This is just a temporary liquidity issue. Our assets are tied up. We can renegotiate." "There is absolutely nothing to negotiate," I said. "You wanted a truck driver. Well, you got one, and this truck just completely cleared the road." I turned to walk out, but then I stopped, realizing there was one final nail to drive into the coffin. I turned back around to face them. "Oh," I added, locking eyes with Vanessa. "One last thing. The wedding is canceled. I called the venue, the caterers, and the florists this morning, and called the whole thing off." You did what?" she gasped, her voice completely trembling. "I canceled it," I said. "Since I'm the one paying for it, I decided to redirect the funds." "Where?" Jean-Luc whispered, his face completely pale. "I donated the deposits," I said, with a grim smile. "I gave them to a trade school for mechanics in the Bronx. They're going to have one hell of a graduation party." I buttoned my suit jacket. "Enjoy the wine," I said, looking at the $2,000 bottle. "It's the very last thing I'm ever buying for you." I turned and walked out of the room, with Richie right on my heels. We left them sitting in the absolute ruins of their own deception, surrounded by legal documents, shredded checks, and a bottle of wine that probably tasted exactly like vinegar by now. We stepped out into the cool Paris night air. The rain was still falling, but I didn't care. It felt clean, like the storm was finally washing away all the grime. I had completely ruined my daughter's wedding, and I had broken her heart. But I had saved her life. As I walked toward the waiting car, I knew the real work was just beginning. Because now, I had to help her pick up the pieces. Let's take a step back and look at exactly how that dinner started. I sat at the head of the table in that private room at L'Embrasé, feeling like a lion watching a pack of hyenas circle a piece of meat. The room itself was a complete insult to common sense. The tapestries on the walls were probably older than the United States itself. The massive crystal chandelier overhead caught the light, fracturing it into 1,000 judgmental rainbows. The air was thick with the scent of old wood, beeswax, and a heavy perfume that was clearly trying to mask the smell of utter desperation. Pierre and Geneviève Laurent sat to my left, while Jean-Luc and Vanessa were on my right. Richie sat right beside me, his briefcase acting like a physical barrier between our world and theirs. The waiter, a man in a tuxedo who looked like he was born with a permanent sneer, handed out the menus. They were incredibly heavy, bound in thick leather, and written entirely in French. There weren't any prices listed anywhere. I opened my menu, knowing exactly what I was looking at. Back in the 80s, I spent 10 years managing logistics for a shipping firm based out of Marseille. I speak French better than half the corporate executives I deal with in the US. I know the difference between a Bordeaux and a Burgundy, and I knew that the homard bleu, the blue lobster, cost more than most of my drivers made in a week. But I purposefully held the menu upside down for a second, just to see how they would react. I saw Genevieve nudge Pierre with her elbow, a cruel, mocking sneer playing on her lips. She leaned over toward Vanessa. "He's holding the menu upside down," she whispered in rapid French, her voice dripping with poison. "Look at him. He looks like a bear trying to read a map." Vanessa let out a sharp chuckle. It was a nervous sound, but she laughed anyway. She didn't defend me, and she didn't correct her. She just took a sip of water and looked away. I flipped the menu right side up, frowning deeply as I tapped the thick paper with a heavy, calloused finger. "I can't read a single word of this," I said loudly, making sure my voice echoed through the quiet room. I made sure to sound as uncultured as they thought I was. "Do they have burgers here? Or a steak? I like my steak well done." Jean-Luc raised his napkin onto his mouth to hide his laughter, while Pierre shook his head with an expression of exaggerated pity. "Mr. Carter," Jean-Luc said, adjusting his tie smoothly, "please allow me to order for the table. The cuisine here is incredibly complex, requiring a very delicate palate. We wouldn't want you ordering something that doesn't agree with you." "Go right ahead, son," I said, leaning back heavily so the chair let out a loud creak. "Order the most expensive stuff on the menu. I'm the one buying anyway." Pierre turned back to Genevieve, switching immediately back to French. "He truly thinks money can buy taste," Pierre sneered. "Look at his hands, covered in scars. He looks like a laborer who stole a nice suit. I can't believe we have to sit through dinner with this peasant." Genevieve patted Pierre's hand gently. "Patience, my love," she replied in French, a sweet, toxic smile on her face. "Think of the wire transfer. Think of the check. Once the funds land, we never have to see this animal ever again. We'll just put him in a far corner at the wedding and tell everyone he's a distant relative who suffered a stroke." I smiled warmly at them, a wide, completely innocent-looking grin. "What are you two chatting about over there?" I asked. "Sounds very high class. French, really, is a beautiful language. We were just saying, how incredibly generous you are, William," Genevieve said, in English, her voice turning sweet like rotting fruit. "We were just admiring your suit. It looks very durable." "Thanks," I said, rubbing the lapel roughly. "Got it on sale. Buy one, get one free." Underneath the table, Richie nudged my foot. He was enjoying the theater far too much. He knew the suit was custom Italian wool, but he loved the act. The waiter returned, and Jean-Luc ordered for the entire table. He ordered the blue lobster, the truffles, the caviar, and a second $20,000 bottle of wine. For me, he ordered the chicken. For the gentleman, Jean-Luc told the waiter in French, pointing a condescending finger my way, "Bring the chicken, and make sure it is cooked completely through. He has the digestion of a small child." The waiter nodded stiffly, not even bothering to look at me. As the courses began to arrive, the insults only escalated. It became an absolute sport for them. They would take a bite of caviar, let out a delighted sigh, and then hurl a direct insult right at my face in French, completely convinced that their language was the perfect shield against my ignorance. "This wine is completely wasted on him," Pierre scoffed in French, swirling the ruby-colored liquid in his glass. "He'd be much happier with a Bud Light. He probably thinks terroir is the name of a dog." Vanessa was drinking quickly, already working on her third glass. I kept my eyes on her, waiting. I was waiting for my daughter, the girl I raised and hoped would grow up strong and kind, to slam her hand on the table and say, "Enough." I was waiting for her to say, "That is my father. Show some respect." But she didn't. Her desire to fit into their world far outweighed her loyalty to me. "Dad," she said, cutting into her lobster, "please try not to make that loud slurping sound when you eat your soup." The Laurents take table manners very seriously. I set my spoon down and looked at her. "I'm just enjoying the food, sweetheart," I replied. Genevieve leaned in. "You must understand, Vanessa," she said in English, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Your father comes from a completely different world, one built on sheer practicality. Our world is entirely about refinement. It's really not his fault." Then she immediately switched back to French, whispering to Vanessa, "He eats like an animal at a trough. Look at him wiping the sauce with his bread. It's absolutely disgusting. How on earth are you his flesh and blood? You are so delicate, and he is a complete barbarian." Vanessa laughed. She actually laughed. "I know," she replied in French. Her accent was terrible, a clumsy, broken American French, but I understood every single word. "I've tried teaching him, but he's incredibly stubborn. Honestly, he's really just a wallet to us. Once we get the trust fund set up, we can keep our distance. If we ever have children, I don't want him around them. He'll only corrupt them. Only them." That was the ultimate betrayal. That was the exact second the final string holding us together snapped completely. She called me a wallet. She said she would keep my future grandchildren away from me. I ripped off a piece of bread from the basket. I wiped the sauce off my plate, intentionally making my movements as large and exaggerated as possible. I chewed with my mouth slightly open, watching Pierre recoil in absolute horror. "This sauce is great," I announced loudly. "Tastes just like gravy." Pierre looked like he was about to vomit. "I can't take this anymore," he hissed to his wife in French. "Hurry up and get the contract done. I want to get the check and get out of here. I need to wash the smell of him off my clothes." Richie cleared his throat. He looked over at me and tapped his watch, signaling that we had recorded more than enough. My phone was sitting right inside my suit pocket, recording every single word of their slanderous conversation. But I wasn't finished yet. I wanted to see exactly how low they were willing to go. I raised my glass high. "Let's make a toast," I said. They all looked at me, reluctantly picking up their glasses. "To family," I said, "and to brand new beginnings. I know I'm not a refined guy, and I know I don't know which fork to use, but I want you all to know how grateful I am that you're accepting me. For a simple truck driver, sitting at a table like this means the absolute world." Jean-Luc smirked arrogantly, raising his glass high. "To family, Mr. Carter, and to your immense generosity." He took a sip, then muttered into his glass in French. "To the absolute idiot who is currently paying for my freedom." I took a slow sip of water. I watched them swallow the expensive wine, watched them devour the food I was paying for, and watched them act like they were the kings of the world, completely convinced they had pulled a fast one on the dumb American. They had, Absolutely no idea that the dumb American understood every single word. They had no idea that every single insult was just another nail they were driving into their own coffin. I looked down at the check sitting near Richie's hand, the fake $3 million check. They hadn't stopped staring at it. Their eyes kept darting back to it over and over again. It was the only reason they tolerated my presence. It was the ultimate carrot, and I decided to dangle it just a little bit longer. "So," I said, "tell me about the wedding plans. What's on the menu?" Genevieve let out a dramatic sigh. "Oh, William, it is exceptionally refined. We are starting with foie gras, followed by duck confit. It is a traditional menu from the Lorraine region." "From your ancestral region?" I asked innocently. "Yes," she lied smoothly. "From the time my great-grandfather served the king." Then she whispered in French under her breath, "My great-grandfather was a butcher in Lyon, but this idiot will believe absolutely anything." I nodded along. Wow, the king's butcher. Truly incredible. Vanessa kicked my leg hard under the table. "Dad, stop talking. You're embarrassing me." I looked at her. Her face flushed red with irritation. She was completely ashamed of me, ashamed of the man who paid for her braces, her clothes, and her entire education. "I'm just trying to make conversation, sweetie," I said softly. "Well, don't," she snapped back sharply. "Just sign the papers. Let's just get this over with." The cruelty was so casual to them. It was effortless, a complete habit by now. They didn't even realize they were doing it anymore. They viewed me strictly as an object, a resource to be tapped, not as a human being. I finished my chicken and wiped my mouth with the linen napkin. "You know," I mused aloud, "I was thinking, since we're all family now, maybe I ought to learn French. It would be wonderful to understand what you're saying to each other." Pierre instantly choked on his wine, coughing violently as his face turned a dark shade of purple. Genevieve patted his back, an expression of sheer panic crossing her face. "Oh no, William," she scrambled to say. "English is the language of business, the language of the future. There is absolutely no need for you to struggle with French. It is an exceptionally difficult language for older people to learn." Then she added in French, "He would sound like a cow attempting to sing opera." I let out a soft laugh. "You might be right," I said. "I should stick to what I know best, driving trucks and writing checks." "Exactly," Jean-Luc agreed smoothly. "Mr. Carter, you have a very special talent for writing checks. You should absolutely focus on your strengths." He slid the contract directly in front of me and uncapped a pen. A Mont Blanc, probably stolen or bought on a maxed-out credit card. "Sign right here," he said, pointing a finger at the line. "And right here. And then we can all go celebrate together." I looked down at the document, then at the pen. I looked at their faces, greedy, expectant, and filled with deep-seated resentment. I picked up the pen. The humiliation was officially over. The dinner was done, the appetizers were cleared, and now it was time for the main course. And I was about to serve them a dish they would absolutely never forget. The heavy Mont Blanc pen felt freezing cold in my hand, like an instrument of execution. Jean-Luc was hovering right over my shoulder like a vulture, waiting for the animal to stop moving. The contract was spread out across the table. A thick stack of cream-colored paper, tied together with a silk ribbon. It looked elegant and formal, but in reality, it was a complete financial death sentence for my bank account. "Just sign right there, Mr. Carter," Jean-Luc repeated, tapping the signature line with a manicured nail. There was a little sticky note flag pointing directly to it. He was trying to rush me, trying to make sure I skipped the reading entirely. I reached into my breast pocket and pulled out a pair of reading glasses, the cheap, drugstore magnifying kind you buy at a gas station for $5. I put them on slowly, deliberately adjusting them on my nose. I saw Genevieve roll her eyes, and I watched Pierre check his watch impatiently. "Hold your horses, son," I said, my voice slow and raspy. My dad taught me to never sign a single thing I haven't read first, even if it takes me all night. Jean-Luc let out a heavy sigh that sounded like a tire losing air. "Mr. Carter, please. It is a standard template contract. It is exactly what we discussed. A family trust to protect Vanessa and secure the assets." Richie leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table and completely invading the Laurences' personal space. "Actually, Jean-Luc, my client prefers a thorough review. We are talking about $3 million here. That represents a lot of miles on the highway. Let him read." I looked down at the paperwork and began to read. As I scanned the text, the blood in my veins began to boil, hotter than a radiator in the dead of July. This wasn't a trust fund at all. It was a complete trap. Section 4, paragraph B stated that the trustee, listed explicitly as Jean-Luc Laurent, would have sole discretionary authority over all distributions for lifestyle maintenance. Lifestyle maintenance. That was just a fancy way of saying he could take my money to gamble, hire escorts, and buy expensive wine, and Vanessa wouldn't have a single say in the matter. I looked up, pointing a finger at the text. "Lifestyle maintenance," I repeated. "Sounds real important. Does that include my trucks?" Pierre scoffed openly. "Trucks? Why on earth would it include trucks? It covers the essentials for a life of their social standing. William, housing in a proper neighborhood, travel, a proper wardrobe. A person must maintain appearances." Then he muttered to Genevieve in French. "He thinks we're going to take his money to buy tires. The man is a complete peasant." I went back to the document, flipping the page with a loud, intentional rustle that broke the silence of the room. Section 7 caught my eye immediately. It was buried deep within a dense wall of legal jargon designed to make your eyes glaze over. It granted the trustee power of attorney over any future inheritance or liquidation of the beneficiary's family assets. I froze, reading it a second time, just to make absolutely sure. They didn't just want the $3 million. They were coming for my entire trucking empire. Somehow, they suspected there was far more wealth, or they were just casting a massive net hoping to scoop up whatever I left behind when I died. If I signed this, Jean-Luc would essentially control Vanessa's inheritance before I was even in the ground. He would have the legal right to sell off my fleet, my warehouses, and my land. My grip on the pen tightened until the plastic let out a faint squeak. "This part right here," I said, pointing at Section 7. "It says something about future assets. What exactly does that mean?" Vanessa let out a loud, dramatic sigh and slammed her hands down onto the table, making the silverware jump. "Dad, please! It just means that if you leave me the house in New Jersey or whatever else, Jean-Luc can handle the logistics of selling it so I don't have to deal with it. He's incredible at business. You're being completely ridiculous. Incredible at business." The man owed casinos 200,000 euros and was living a completely fabricated life. I looked at my daughter, her cheeks flushed from the wine and irritation. She wasn't even looking at the contract. She was fixated on her own reflection in the dark window, fixing a loose strand of hair. She didn't care what she was signing away. She just wanted the cash. She wanted the night to end so she could go back to playing royalty. "You trust him that much, sweetheart?" I asked quietly. "You'd hand over everything to him, even the things I built with my bare hands." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Yes, Dad. I trust him. He's my husband. Well, he'll be in 2 days. Unlike you, he actually understands how wealth works. He knows how to invest. He'll take your little savings and turn it into real money." Jean-Luc puffed out his chest proudly. "Exactly, Mr. Carter. I have many connections in private equity and emerging markets. Your 3 million will easily become 10 million within 5 years." I looked back down at the paper to hide the expression in my eyes. If I looked at him right now, I might lose my temper completely. 10 million? He would turn 3 million into 0 within 3 weeks. I kept reading. Section 9. In the event of a dissolution of marriage, the assets within the trust remain under the control of the trustee as compensation for administrative services. I almost laughed out loud. It was a reverse prenuptial agreement. If they got divorced, he kept the cash. He kept absolutely everything. He was essentially charging her an administrative fee for stealing her inheritance. I glanced over at Richie, who had read the draft earlier. He gave me the tiniest, almost imperceptible nod. He knew. He knew this document was the ultimate smoking gun. It proved premeditation, malice, and exactly how they viewed me, as a brainless ATM. I turned another page. "Oh, for God's sake!" Genevieve snapped, completely losing her composure as the mask finally slipped. "William, this is utterly absurd. We have a reception to attend, and people are waiting for us. You are reading this like a child learning the alphabet. Just sign the damn paper." Then she hissed in French, "If he delays for 1 more minute, I am going to scream. He's doing this on purpose. He's too stupid to understand it, so he just stares at the words, hoping they'll make sense. Grab his hand and force him to sign it." I looked up at her, lowering my reading glasses slightly. "I'm just a slow reader, ma'am," I said innocently. Big words confuse me. My Luke stood up and walked behind my chair. Placing his hands firmly on my shoulders, his grip was tight, far too tight. It was a threat disguised as a massage. "Mr. Carter, we are all family here. We all want the exact same thing. We want Vanessa to be happy. Do you want Vanessa to be happy?" "Of course I do," I said. "Then sign it," he urged. "Sign it and show her that you support her. Show her that you are more than just a truck driver. That you are a father she can rely on. Show her that you belong at this table." The manipulation was clumsy but aggressive. He was trying to weaponize my insecurities, telling me that the only way to be a good father was to be a silent banker. I looked over at Vanessa. She was glaring at me, her eyes cold and harsh. "Dad, if you don't sign this right now, I am walking out and you will never see me again. I mean it. You are ruining absolutely everything. You're proving them completely right. You're proving just how small you are." Small? I built a company that moves 10,000 tons of freight every single day. I employ 400 people. I've stared down blizzards, hurricanes, and economic collapses. And my daughter, sitting in a dress I paid for, was calling me small because I refused to let a con artist empty my pockets. The tension in the room became a physical weight. Pierre was tapping his spoon against the table, a rhythmic, metallic ticking that sounded like a bomb counting down. Genevieve gripped her wine glass so tightly, her knuckles went white. Jean-Luc's hot breath was hitting the back of my neck. They were desperate, terrified. They needed this signature like a drowning person needs air. If I didn't sign, the lenders in Nice would break Jean-Luc's legs. If I didn't sign, the landlord of the fake chateau would throw them out. If I didn't sign, their entire house of cards would come crashing down. I looked back down at the signature line and leaned forward, placing the tip of the pen onto the paper. The ink bled into the paper fibers, creating a small black dot. Jean-Luc let out a sigh of relief, and I felt his shoulders loosen. Vanessa flashed a triumphant, greedy smile. "Finally," she whispered. I wrote the letter W, the very first letter of my name. Then I stopped entirely, lifting the pen from the page. "Is there a problem?" Pierre snapped back. "Why did you stop?" I stared at the pen, wrinkling my brow. "This pen," I said slowly. "It feels real light. Is it solid gold or just plated?" Jean-Luc stiffened instantly. "It is solid gold, Mr. Carter. It's a family heirloom." "Is that so?" I asked, flipping the pen casually between my fingers. I could see the tiny scratches on the barrel, revealing the base metal underneath the gold plating. A complete fake, just like everything else in that room. Just like the chateau, the noble titles, and the love they claimed to have for my daughter. I set the pen back down. "I can't sign with this," I said flatly. "It just doesn't feel right." "Use your own pen," Vanessa shouted, standing up from her chair. "I don't care if you use a crayon. Just sign the paper, Dad. Stop torturing us." I looked at her, really looked at her. I saw the pure desperation in her eyes. But it wasn't out of love for me, and it wasn't because I wouldn't be at her wedding. It was desperation for a lifestyle she felt entitled to. She was completely willing to sell me out, just to secure a seat at a table made of sawdust and glue. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out my own pen. A cheap, blue ink ballpoint, the kind you buy by the box. I clicked it. In the dead silence, the sound snapped sharply through the room. Click. I hovered the point right above the paper. Jean-Luc leaned in closer, his voice a tense whisper. "Sign it. Change her life." I took one final look at that contract, scanning the clauses designed to strip away my dignity, my empire, and my self-respect. I looked at the words that reduced 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears to a simple administrative fee for a French scam artist. I took a deep breath. "You're entirely right, Jean-Luc," I said calmly. "I should stick to what I do best." I pressed the pen to the paper, but I didn't write my name. Instead, I drew a thick, heavy diagonal line across the entire page, from the top left corner all the way to the bottom right, pressing down so hard the paper tore slightly. Then I drew another line in the opposite direction, creating a massive X right over their words. The sound of the tearing paper snapped through the room like a gunshot. Jean-Luc recoiled instantly, as if he'd been burned. "What? What are you doing?" he stammered. I stood up, pushing my chair back heavily, and picked up the ruined contract. "I'm making an edit," I said. I ripped the page clean out of the binding, crumpled it into a tight ball, and tossed it right onto the empty plate in front of me. "That's complete garbage." The room erupted instantly. Pierre started shouting in furious French. Geneviève gasped loudly while clutching her pearl necklace, and Jean-Luc looked like he was about to pass out cold. But I wasn't done yet. I looked over at Richie, and he handed me a brand new folder. The real one, packed with the actual facts. I cleared my throat, and the sheer authority in my voice silenced them immediately. "You wanted me to sign a contract," I said, my voice dead calm and cold as asphalt. "You wanted to transfer my assets and manage my lifestyle. I threw the new folder onto the table. It slid across the white cloth, striking Jean-Luc's wine glass with a sharp ring. "I think it's time we talk about your lifestyle, Jean-Luc," I said coldly. "Specifically, the part where you owe a certain lender in Nice 180,000 euros, or the part where the chateau is a rental, or maybe the part where your parents are completely bankrupt." I looked over at Vanessa. She was frozen solid, her mouth hanging slightly open. "Happy wedding anniversary, sweetie," I said grimly. "I brought you a gift. It's called the truth." Jean-Luc's face turned completely ash-gray. He looked at the folder, then up at me, and in that exact moment, the arrogance died. The nobility vanished, leaving behind nothing but a cornered rat. And I was the cat. And I was incredibly hungry. Pierre Laurent stared at the folder on the table, as if it were a ticking bomb. His flushed face twisted with rage and panic, the veins in his neck bulging against his tight collar. He glared at Richie, then at me, and then he made his final, fatal mistake. He spoke in his native tongue one last time. He turned to Genevieve, hissing in rapid, venomous French. "This American pig is bluffing. He knows absolutely nothing. He's just trying to intimidate us because he's too cheap to pay. Don't look at the papers, just call the staff and have him thrown out. He's a peasant trying to sit on a throne." I watched him finish, watching his lips move and the spit fly from his mouth in his agitation. When he stopped, I let the silence stretch across the room, letting the dead quiet hang for 5 seconds, then 10. I took a slow sip of the $20,000 wine, letting it swirl in my glass while locking eyes with Pierre. And then I spoke. "Monsieur Laurent," I said softly. My voice wasn't the gravelly shout of a truck driver. It was smooth, precise, and entirely fluent. It was the French of a man who spent a decade negotiating shipping contracts in corporate boardrooms in Marseille. It was the French of a man who mastered the language far better than the fraud sitting across from him. I continued in flawless French. "I assure you, I am not bluffing. And as for being a peasant, I find that only the people who actually work the soil know the true value of the land beneath their feet. And you, my friend, are standing on quicksand." The sound that came from Genevieve's throat wasn't even human. It was a strangled gasp, a sharp intake of air that sounded like a vacuum seal breaking. Her hand flew to her chest, her elbow catching her wine glass. The crystal stemware holding the Romanée Conti tipped over, sending the deep red liquid pouring across the white tablecloth like blood from a wound, soaking right through the fabric and dripping onto her dress. She didn't move to stop it. She just stared at me, her eyes wide and terrifyingly pale against her heavily made-up face. Pierre's mouth opened, but absolutely no sound came out. He looked exactly like a fish out of water, gasping for air. The color drained from his face so fast, it looked like someone had pulled a plug, turning him from bright red to a sickly gray in a matter of seconds. Jean-Luc dropped his fork. It clattered against the porcelain plate, the sharp metallic ring echoing through the dead silence. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated terror. He realized in that brief moment that the game wasn't just over. It had been rigged from the exact second I walked through the door. Vanessa was the last one to understand. She looked at me, then at them, blinking rapidly. "Dad," she whispered, "since when? Since when do you speak French?" "Since 1985, Vanessa." I switched back to English, leaning forward with my elbows on the table, right next to the spilled wine. "Back when I was building our European logistics network." Back when I was spending 18 hours a day in meetings with port authorities in Le Havre. You were a baby. You don't remember. But I speak it. I read it, and I understand every single word. I turned my gaze back to Pierre, switching seamlessly back to French. When you called me a pig, I understood. When you called my daughter a cow, I understood. When you talked about shoving me into a dark corner at the wedding like a piece of broken furniture, I understood every bit of it. Pierre began to tremble, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the edge of the table to steady himself. Mr. Carter, he stammered, his French suddenly weak and hesitant. This is a misunderstanding. A joke? Our family has a very dry sense of humor. A joke, I repeated coldly. I reached into the folder Richie had thrown down and pulled out a single page with a corporate bank header. Is this a joke, Pierre? I slid the paper across to him, right through the puddle of red wine, staining the bottom edge. That's a default notice, I said. From the bank in Lyon. The bank holding the mortgage on your dry cleaners. The ones you were using to shift funds for the local gangs. It states that your liquidation payments are 3 months overdue. It also says that if you don't settle the balance by the 1st of the month, you are going to prison. Pierre stared at the paper without touching it, looking at it as if it were radioactive. How did you get this? He whispered. I bought it, I said simply. He looked up at me, his eyes completely vacant. You what? I bought your debt, Pierre, I explained. I called the bank this morning and Richie handled the transfer. I bought it for a fraction of its face value, honestly. They were thrilled to clear it off their books. They viewed it as a bad loan, but I told them I knew the debtor personally. I leaned back in my chair and smiled a sharp, shark-like grin. I am your creditor, Pierre. I own you. I own your debt. I own your past. And right now, I hold the key to your future. If I want to, I can make a single phone call and have the French authorities waiting for you at Charles de Gaulle Airport the second you try to fly home. I can have you arrested for fraud before the dessert even hits this table. Genevieve broke down, letting out a soft, pitiful sob as she buried her face in her hands, her diamond rings clinking together. Please, she wept. Please, William, we are family. Family. I let out a harsh laugh. 10 minutes ago I was a peasant. 10 minutes ago I was just a wallet. Now, I'm family because I have my hands around your throat. I turned my gaze to Jean-Luc's, the prince, the consultant, the gambler. He was cowering in his chair, trying to make himself look as small and invisible as possible. He was sweating profusely, the beads rolling down his forehead and into his eyes. And then there's you, I said, pulling another spreadsheet from the folder. 180,000 euros owed to a certain Mr. Petrov in Nice, a man with a notoriously short fuse. I spoke with his associate today. Jean-Luc let out a whimpering sound, a high-pitched noise like a kicked dog. No, he whispered. You spoke to them? I did, I confirmed. I told them Jean-Luc Laurent was about to come into a massive inheritance. I told them he was marrying the daughter of a wealthy American trucking mogul. A tiny glimmer of hope flickered in Jean-Luc's eyes. You vouched for me? I shook my head slowly. No, son. I told them the wedding was canceled. I told them the trust fund was a complete lie and that you weren't getting a single penny of my money. I also mentioned that you were currently sitting in L'Ambroisie in Paris, drinking $20,000 wine while owing them cash. Jean-Luc's face went entirely white. He looked toward the door as if expecting Mr. Petrov to walk in at any second. "Why?" he rasped, his voice cracking. "Why would you do that? They'll ruin me." "Because you tried to steal my company," I said fiercely. "You tried to steal my life's work. You looked me in the eye and lied to me, and you made my daughter believe you were a king, when you're just a clown with a gambling addiction." I looked over at Vanessa. She was sitting completely motionless, pale as a statue, with her hands resting in her lap. She was staring at Jean-Luc, looking at him as if she had never seen him before in her entire life, watching the sweat on his lip and the raw terror in his eyes. "Vanessa," I called out softly. She turned her head slowly to face me, her eyes completely hollow. The arrogance and the snobbery were completely gone, replaced by absolute shock. "I have one final thing to tell you," I said. I reached into the breast pocket of my suit and pulled out a small, black velvet box that looked exactly like a ring box. Vanessa frowned, looking utterly confused. "I didn't buy you a ring," I said. "You have enough jewelry." I clicked the box open to reveal a simple silver key attached to a Dior logo keychain. "You were furious about that wedding dress," I reminded her. "You were angry because the card got declined, and because the staff looked at you like a thief." She gave a numb, slow nod. "Well," I said, "I took care of the problem." I placed the key on the table. "I bought the boutique." Vanessa's jaw dropped completely. You bought the dress?" I said, "I bought the boutique," I clarified. "The franchise location on Avenue Montaigne. The exact one you went to. I called the holding company this morning. It was a distressed asset sale. They were desperate for liquid cash, and I made an offer." I slid the key toward her. "I own the building, Vanessa. I own the inventory. And I own the employment contracts of the exact sales associates who cut your card in half." She stared at the key, reaching out a trembling hand to take it. So I can have the dress?" she asked, her voice small and filled with a childlike hope, like a kid who just burned the house down but still expected ice cream. I slapped my hand firmly over the key, locking eyes with her. "No," I said. "I bought the shop so I could fire them," I revealed coldly. "And I bought it so I could officially ban you from entering." "Ban me?" she whispered brokenly. "Yes," I said firmly. "You are blacklisted, Vanessa. Blacklisted from the shop, barred from using my name in this city, removed from my bank accounts, and completely banned from my company." I stood up, the legs of my chair screeching loudly against the floor. "I set aside 300 grand for a wedding that isn't happening. I spent 50 grand clearing a portion of your fiancé's debt just so I could hold it over his head. And I spent 5 million buying a retail store just to make a point." I buttoned my suit jacket and looked down at them, this broken family of frauds, and the daughter who thought she was superior to the father who raised her. Pierre was weeping openly. Now Genevieve was staring blankly at the ruined tablecloth, and Jean-Luc was trembling uncontrollably. Richie stood up, snapped his briefcase shut, and gave me a firm nod. "We're completely done here, Bill." I took one last look at Vanessa. "You wanted a fairy tale," I said quietly. "Well, this is the end of the story. The carriage turned back into a pumpkin, the horses are mice, and the princess is entirely on her own." I turned my back on them and walked toward the heavy oak doors. I heard the screech of Vanessa's chair sliding back, and the frantic sound of her footsteps running after me. "Dad!" she screamed. "Dad! Wait!" I didn't stop. I pushed the doors open and walked right into the main dining room. The patrons all looked up, watching a man in a sharp gray suit walking with absolute purpose, followed by a lawyer with a briefcase, and a girl in a beautiful white dress running behind them with tears streaming down her face. Dad, screaming, "Dad, please," she begged, grabbing my arm and sinking her fingers into my sleeve. "Everyone is looking. Please don't leave me here. They don't have any money. Jean-Luc is completely broke. How am I supposed to get home? How am I supposed to pay for the hotel?" I stopped and looked down at her hand gripping my arm. She was wearing the diamond engagement ring, the one I now knew was likely a fake or completely unpaid for. I gently but firmly brushed her hand away. "Figure it out," I said flatly. "But I have absolutely nothing," she sobbed. "You canceled the cards and stopped the transfers. I have nothing left." "You have your lineage," I countered coldly. "Nobility. You have your nobility and your worldly in-laws. Go ask them for help. They're bankrupt," she shrieked. "You know they're bankrupt. You just ruined them." "I didn't ruin them, Vanessa," I said quietly. "I just turned on the lights. They ruined themselves, and you were a willing accomplice. You were completely ashamed of me, ashamed of the honest work that paid for every single luxury you enjoy." I leaned in closer. "You said oil and water don't mix. You were right. I'm the engine oil that keeps things moving. You're just the water, and you've officially evaporated." I turned around, walked out of the restaurant, and stepped into the cool, crisp Paris air. The rain had stopped completely, and the stars were out. Behind me, I could hear her screaming my name, followed by the maitre d', politely asking her to lower her voice before the heavy doors clicked shut. I walked to the waiting car and Richie opened the door for me. I slid inside, leaning back against the leather seats, and took a long, deep breath. It was over. The lesson was officially taught. Richie slid in next to me and tapped the partition. "To the airport," he instructed the driver. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back at the restaurant windows once. I knew exactly what was happening inside. The panic setting in, the blame flying in every direction. I pulled out my phone, opened my banking app, and looked at the balance. It was lower than it was yesterday, significantly lower. But I felt wealthier than I had in years. "Did I go too far?" I asked Richie quietly. Richie looked over at me, loosening his tie with a smirk. "Bill, you bought a Dior boutique just to ban her from entering. That is absolutely biblical. That's old-school justice. She won't ever forget it." "She got the message," I murmured. "Trust me, she did," Richie agreed. "You didn't just burn the bridge, Bill. You completely cleared the map." I nodded and closed my eyes, feeling exhausted down to my bones. But as the car navigated the Paris streets toward the private jet that would take me back to my modest home in New Jersey, I felt a profound, strange sense of peace. I had lost a daughter, but I had completely reclaimed my dignity. Sometimes, you have to cut the ties completely just to find yourself again. My name is Bill Carter. I'm a truck driver, and I'm heading home. I stood by the open door of the black Mercedes, the engine idling with a low, deep hum that sounded like a growl in the quiet Paris street. I had just walked away from Vanessa. I had turned my back, but the frauds weren't done scrambling yet. They weren't about to watch the ship sink without trying to claw their way onto a lifeboat. The heavy oak doors of the restaurant flew open again, and this time, it wasn't just Vanessa. The entire pack of frauds came spilling out onto the pavement under the streetlights, looking like a shattered parade of failed ambition. Jean-Luc stumbled out first, looking like he'd just taken a heavy punch to the gut. Pierre and Genevieve were right behind him, completely panicked, their faces streaked with ruined mascara. "Mr. Carter! Wait!" Jean-Luc yelled, running toward me with his arms wide open. "Please, we can fix this. The debt in Nice, the 180,000. We can set up a payment plan. I have major prospects. I'm closing a massive deal in Zurich next week." I stopped before stepping into the car, leaning against the door frame with my arms crossed. I looked closely at the sweat soaking through his expensive collar, and the sheer panic in his eyes. He wasn't worried about losing Vanessa or saving his honor. He was worried about his physical safety. The lenders in Nice weren't known for their patience. "You want a payment plan?" I asked, my voice flat. Yes, exactly," Jean-Luc panted, stopping a few feet away, not daring to get any closer. "Just a bridge loan until the wedding is sorted out, just until I'm back on my feet." I let out a short, sharp laugh. "There is no wedding, Jean-Luc," I said coldly, "and you're not getting back on your feet. You're going to be answering for your choices for a very long time. But since you brought up your debts, let's talk about collateral." "Collateral?" He blinked, confused. "You owe me money now," I reminded him. "I own your notes, and since you look like a massive flight risk, I'm calling in the balance effective immediately." I held out my hand, palm up. "The watch," I said. Jean-Luc froze, instinctively, covering his left wrist with his right hand. He was wearing a Patek Philippe, or at least a very good imitation of one. It was likely the only asset he had left that wasn't rented or borrowed. My watch?" he stammered. "Hand it over," I said, my voice cutting through the night air like a knife. "Consider it a down payment. You two, unless you'd prefer, I call the associates in Nice right now and tell them you're refusing to settle up." Jean-Luc stared at me, then glanced at the phone in my other hand. Trembling violently, he slowly unbuckled the strap and placed the gold watch into my hand, his fingers shaking so much he nearly dropped it. I weighed it in my hand under the streetlights. Heavy, solid gold. Probably bought with seed money from some other family he'd swindled. I slid it right into my pocket. "Now the keys to the car," I added. "The keys? To the Porsche?" "Yes," I said. "The silver 911 you drove to my house in New Jersey, the one you leased under a shell company. I happen to hold a massive lien on that vehicle because I purchased that debt from the leasing agency this morning." He stared at me, his mouth hanging open. You bought the car note too." "I bought everything, Jean-Luc," I said calmly. "I told you, I know logistics. I know exactly how to surround an adversary. Now give me the keys and enjoy your walk home." He fumbled through his pockets and pulled out the key fob, gripping it tightly for a split second until his knuckles went white. It was his ultimate symbol of fake success. The speed he used to run away from his failures. He dropped it into my open palm. I tossed the fob over the roof of the Mercedes to Richie, who was standing by the trunk. "Have the car towed, Richie," I ordered. "Strip it down. As for the rest of you, get out of my sight." I turned to step into the car, but that's when the explosion happened. It wasn't a physical blast. It was the desperate eruption of a man who had lost absolutely everything and needed someone else to blame. He couldn't touch me. I was too powerful, too established. So he turned on the only person in his reach, who was weaker than him. He turned on Vanessa. She was standing there shivering in her white dress, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, tears streaming down her face. She looked at him with pleading eyes, waiting for comfort, waiting for him to tell her they would get through this together and that their relationship mattered more than money. "Jean-Luc," she whispered brokenly. What are we going to do? His face twisted into an expression of pure, ugly hatred. What are we going to do? He mocked her savagely. There is no we, you absolute fool. Look at what you've done. Look at what your father did to me. Vanessa recoiled as if she'd been struck. Jean-Luc, shut up, he screamed, his voice echoing off the stone buildings. You useless American garbage. You told me he was an idiot. You told me he was just a walking checkbook. You said he would sign absolutely anything. Because he was desperate for your approval. I didn't know, she sobbed. You don't know anything, he roared, stepping toward her aggressively. Walking around playing the princess, spending cash you don't have, bragging about your truck driver father. The only reason I ever tolerated you was for the money. Do you understand me? I had to hold back vomit looking at your face every morning, because I thought a massive payout was coming. I paused before stepping into the car, watching the scene unfold. A part of me, the father inside, wanted to step in and flatten him. But the teacher inside knew she had to hear this. She needed to hear every single word. It was harsh medicine, but it was the only thing that would cure her blindness completely. Vanessa stood frozen, her eyes wide, with absolute shock. It was as if the mask had been completely ripped away, revealing the monster underneath. You never loved me, she whispered. Love you? He laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. I love caviar. I love fast cars. I love staying out of a jail cell. You were just a ticket inside, and now the ticket is completely expired. You are absolutely nothing to me. Actually, you're less than nothing. You're just a liability. He spat on the ground right at her feet. Pierre and Genevieve stepped in then, but it wasn't to protect her. You absolute idiot, Pierre shouted at Jean-Luc, shoving his son hard. You let him do this. You let that American outsmart us. I told you to get the signature before dinner. I told you not to let him read the documents. Don't blame me, Jean-Luc shoved back fiercely. You were the one drinking the wine and insulting him to his face. You arrogant old fool. You gave the whole game away. Enough, Genevieve shrieked, grabbing Pierre's arm to break them apart. Stop fighting. We need to fix this. We need resources. She turned toward me, running up to the Mercedes, and pounding, desperately, on the tinted glass. William, please, she begged, all her high society dignity completely gone. She was just a desperate woman in a stained dress. Don't leave us like this. We have nowhere to go. The hotel is going to throw us out tonight, and we don't even have flights home. I looked at her through the glass without rolling the window down, keeping my expression completely blank. Vanessa stood entirely alone in the middle of the sidewalk. The people she chose over me, her fiancé and his family, were tearing each other apart like wild dogs over a scrap of meat. Jean-Luc was shoving his father. Genevieve was clawing at my car door, and their voices created a chaotic symphony of greed and blame. And Vanessa was completely silent. She looked over at me, her eyes meeting mine through the tinted glass. I saw the exact moment the truth finally hit her, the moment her heart truly broke. It wasn't because I cut off the cash. It's because she finally saw exactly what her vanity had bought. She saw the total rot. She saw the ugliness. She looked at Jean-Luc, who was now screaming curses at his own mother, and then down at her wedding dress, the ultimate symbol of her pride. She took a slow step toward the car, her lips forming a single word, Dad. My hand hovered over the door handle inside. I hesitated, This was the moment. I could open the door, let her in, and save her from the cold and the humiliation. I could take her home, and we could pretend none of this ever happened. But if I did that, she would never actually learn. If I saved her now, she would spend the rest of her life blaming me for ruining her wedding instead of realizing that they had ruined her life. She needed to stand in the rain. She needed to feel the cold. And she needed to find her own way back. I pulled my hand away from the handle and tapped the partition. "Let's go," I told the driver. The car pulled away smoothly. Looking out the rear window, I watched Jean-Luc try to chase the car for a few steps before giving up and kicking a trash can. I saw Genevieve collapse onto the pavement and Pierre bury his face in his hands. And I saw Vanessa standing entirely alone under the streetlights. A small, white figure fading into the distance. She didn't chase after the car this time. She just stood there, watching her safety net drive away. Richie looked over at me in silence. He poured 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter in the center console and handed me the glass. I took it, my hand completely steady. "That was incredibly tough, Bill," he said softly. "Raising kids is tough, Richie," I replied. "Saving them from themselves is even harder." I looked down at the Patek Philippe watch in my hand. It was heavy, gold, and ticking away smoothly. Time was officially up for the Laurent family. But for Vanessa, the clock was just starting to run. She didn't have a single dollar, she had nowhere to stay, and she didn't have a friend in Paris. She was about to find out exactly what she was made of. Was she still her father's daughter? Or was she just a passenger in her own life? I took a long sip of the scotch. "We're heading back to New Jersey tonight," I said. "I have a fleet of trucks to run." Richie nodded. "And the girl?" I looked out the window at the blurred lights of Paris fading away. "If she's got Carter blood in her veins," I said, "she'll find a way through. If she doesn't, well, then she belongs right here with them." The car accelerated onto the highway, leaving the city of lies far behind. I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but just to listen to the steady hum of the engine, waiting for the plane that would take me back to a world where honest work and a simple handshake actually meant something. I was completely done with aristocracy. I was ready to get back to reality. 6 months later, a thin morning mist hung low over the lake, curling around the reeds like smoke. It was completely quiet. The kind of absolute peace you can't buy with money. The kind that doesn't exist in Paris or New York. I cast my fish line out, the lure hitting the water with a soft splash sending ripples across the surface. Richie sat next to me in a folding chair, a can of soda in his cup holder, even though it was only 10 in the morning. He was mostly retired now, claiming that after the showdown in Paris, he'd seen enough excitement to last the rest of his career. "Any bites yet?" Richie asked. "Not yet," I replied. "They're thinking about it. Fish are smart. They don't just jump at the first shiny thing they see. They wait, and they evaluate." We sat in a comfortable, easy silence for a while. The kind shared between 2 old friends who knew exactly where all the secrets were buried. "It's been 6 months, Bill," Richie said, keeping his eyes on the bobber floating on the gray water. "Have you heard from her?" I reeled in the line slightly to keep the tension firm. "I got an email yesterday," I said. "And?" Richie asked. I didn't reply, I said. "Not yet." Richie nodded, taking a sip from his can. "What did it say?" "It was brief," I said. "She didn't ask for money, and she didn't ask for a flight home. She just wrote, 'Happy birthday, Dad,' and attached a photo." "What kind of photo?" "A paycheck." Richie chuckled. "Exactly that," I smiled. Richie let out a sharp laugh that startled a nearby duck. A paycheck. From where? A diner in Queens, I said. A little place called the Rust Bucket on Northern Boulevard. She's working double shifts as a waitress. A waitress? Richie repeated, surprised. Vanessa Carter? The girl who refused to wear anything without a designer logo, serving coffee and clearing tables in Queens. That's the one, I said. And apparently, she's doing an incredible job. The manager told the investigator I hired that she's the hardest worker on his staff. She's never late, she doesn't complain, and she covers shifts whenever someone calls out. The investigator? Richie looked over. You're still keeping tabs on her? I'm a father, Richie, I said softly. Cutting her off financially didn't mean I stopped caring about her. I just needed to know she was safe and had food to eat. I don't interfere, and I don't offer help, but I keep watch. And she is standing on her own 2 feet. Where is she living? Richie asked. A studio apartment in Astoria, I replied. 4th floor, no elevator, no doorman, no view of the skyline. Just a brick wall and a fire escape. She pays the rent entirely herself out of her cash tips. Richie shook his head in amazement. That is one hell of a turnaround, Bill. 6 months ago, she was drinking $20,000 wine and calling you a peasant. Now she's serving coffee to guys who look exactly like you. That was the entire point, I said, looking out over the water. She needed to understand the people she used to look down on. She needed to see that the folks wearing work boots aren't lesser. They're the absolute backbone of this country. And she needed to learn that $1 isn't just paper. It represents time, effort, and hard work. I stared out across the lake as the sun began to break through the mist, revealing the changing colors of the trees on the far shore. Autumn was officially arriving. She wrote something else in that email, I added quietly. What was that? Richie asked. She said she was sorry, I murmured. For the wedding? For the money? No, I said. She was sorry for ever being ashamed of where she came from. She mentioned that last week she served a truck driver who came in for breakfast, a regular guy who reminded her of me. She actually sat down and talked with him. Really talked. And she realized she'd been looking at the entire world through a very distorted lens her whole life. Richie smiled warmly. Sounds like she's finally growing up, Bill. She's on the right path, I agreed. She isn't completely there yet. And she still has a long road ahead of her, but for the first time, she's the one steering the wheel. And that's all I ever wanted. What about the cash? Richie asked. The $300,000 from the wedding fund. I reeled my line back in to check the bait, seeing it was still perfectly intact. I spent it, I smiled grimly. Richie raised an eyebrow. What did you spend it on? A new rig? A vacation? No, I replied. I set up a scholarship fund. A scholarship? Richie asked. The William Carter International Exchange Program, I said. It's strictly for the kids of long-haul truck drivers, especially the ones from low-income families who want to study foreign languages and global cultures. Richie burst out laughing all over again, Nobbit, this time clutching his stomach and slapping his knee. You've got to be kidding me, he managed to say. You set up a fund for truckers' kids to learn French. I smiled, and it was the first real smile I'd felt in 6 months. Why not? I said. Why should people like the Laurents be the only ones who get to speak the language of diplomacy? Why should culture be limited by a bank account? I want the next generation of blue-collar kids to walk into places like Lambresi, pick up the menu right side up, and read it perfectly. I want them to look those snobs dead in the eye and tell them exactly where to go in flawless Parisian French. "That is beautiful, Bill," Richie said, wiping a tear from his eye. "That is pure, poetic justice." "It's an investment," I corrected. "I'm investing in dignity." We fell back into silence as the lake water gently lapped against the boat. Everything felt incredibly calm. "What about the Laurents?" Richie asked after a minute. "Whatever happened to those high society aristocrats?" I cast my line back out. It flew high and far, cutting through the air before splashing down into the deep water. "Scattered to the wind," I said. "Pierre is serving time in a minimum security facility in Lyon for tax fraud. Turns out I wasn't the only creditor he was hiding from. Genevieve is living in a tiny apartment in Marseille with her sister. Word is she's selling off her fake jewelry collection on eBay just to get by. And Jean-Luc? Jean-Luc is completely on the run," I said. "Last I heard, he was washing dishes at a hostel in Belgium. The lender from Nice, Mr. Petrov, has a very long memory. Jean-Luc has to keep moving constantly. He's going to spend the rest of his life looking over his shoulder." Richie nodded, slowly. "So you won?" he said. I looked over at him. "Did I win?" I asked myself. I looked down at my hands, weathered, calloused, covered in spots and old scars. These were the hands that held steering wheels, gear shifts, baby bottles, and multi-million-dollar contracts. "I didn't do it to win, Richie," I said quietly. "You don't defeat your kids. You raise them. And sometimes, raising them means lifting them up, and other times, it means letting them fall hard so they finally learn how to stand up on their own. I lost my daughter for a little while," I continued. "I lost the little girl who used to think I could reach up and grab the moon for her. But I think I might be getting a woman back. A real woman. One who understands the true value of a hard day's work, and who knows that respect is earned, never inherited." I checked my phone. The email was still right there on the screen. "Happy birthday, Dad." I tapped the reply button and typed out 4 words. "I am proud of you. I didn't hit send just yet. I'm going to wait a little longer. I'll let her work a few more double shifts. I'll let her make it through the winter, on her own. I want her to build up a little more character first, but eventually, I will send it." I pocketed the phone just as something hit my line. The tip of the fishing rod bent sharply toward the water, and the line went taut. I stood up, bracing my feet firmly against the deck, and began to reel. It felt heavy, a real fighter. "Got one on?" Richie shouted. "Yeah," I said. "We got one." I pulled back, and the fish fought hard, trying desperately to stay down in the dark, deep water. But I was patient, and I was strong. I reeled it in slowly, letting out a little slack whenever it made a frantic run, and pulling it back the second it grew tired. It was a dance, a real struggle, just like being a parent. You hold on tight, you give them space when they need it, and you pull back when it counts. You just pray the line doesn't snap. Ultimately, if you're lucky enough and you stay patient, you get to bring them home. I broke the fish through the surface, scooping it into the net. It was a largemouth bass, a massive one, thrashing around and catching the sunlight in flashes of gold and green. "Beautiful catch," Richie remarked. I looked at it. It was fighting with everything it had. It was strong, and it was beautiful precisely because of that struggle. I reached into the net, carefully removed the hook, and lowered the fish back into the water. "Go ahead," I whispered. It stayed completely still for a split second, adjusting to the water before flicking its tail and disappearing back into the deep, right back into the struggle. back to the only life it knew. "Why'd you let it go?" Richie asked, looking confused. "Because," I said, wiping my damp hands on my jeans. "It's not ready yet. It still needs some room to grow." I sat back down, picked up my thermos of coffee, and looked up at the sky. It was vast, completely blue, and went on forever. "My name is Bill Carter. I'm a truck driver, a millionaire, and a father. For the first time in a very long time, I feel a true sense of peace inside. There's still a long road ahead, but at least right now, I know exactly who's behind the wheel." In the end, I realized that true wealth isn't measured by a bank account or a rented chateau in France. It's measured by your integrity, the calluses on your hands, and the peace in your mind. The Laurents chased after a complete illusion and lost absolutely everything. I stayed true to my roots and kept my dignity completely intact. To anyone watching this story, if you've ever felt undervalued or judged strictly by your appearance, keep your head held high. Your true worth is never defined by someone else's inability to see it. And to all the parents out there, don't be afraid to let your children struggle. It's exactly through that struggle that they discover their own strength and ultimately find out who they truly are. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more videos just like this one. Let me know in the comments below, would you have forgiven Vanessa sooner? Or did she truly need that tough love? I read every single comment. See you in the next video.